Before we begin the British Sign Language Bill, I would like to point out that a British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on parliamentlive.tv. I am delighted to mark this first occasion of the live use of BSL interpretation in the House of Lords. Yeah. My Lords, second reading of the British Sign Language Bill. Lord Holmes of Richmond.
My Lords, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. I'm grateful to the Lord Speaker for taking the first line of my speech. But it is such a positive point and right that he should make it from the chair to show the whole House's support for such a wonderful first in your Lordship's chamber. My Lords, standing here this morning, I am but a bridge, a conduit, a messenger for the British Sign Language Private Members Bill. All of the credit, all of the plaudits should go to the Honourable Lady Rosie Cooper in another place, who steered her Private Members Bill through the other place in such style. Similarly, credit should go to all the organisations who've supported and pushed for such a Private Members Bill, not least the BDA, the RNID, all other organisations and individuals right across the country who have spent so much time pushing for this measure. My Lords, I start with an apology. I would have liked to have practised a small amount of sign language to put into my speech this morning, but having consulted with many people because of the difficulties, obviously, for myself of being able to have a conversation in BSL, it was advised that it would be inappropriate for me to do so, and I hope that's okay with everybody out there, and I hope that it is perfectly in order and fantastic again to underline the live signing on Parliament TV as I speak. The purpose of the bill, my Lords, in many ways incredibly straightforward. Simply this: to include BSL signers. One example to make the point. Imagine you are a BSL signer and you go to a hospital or a GP appointment. The news might not be good. It may be. But whether good or bad, it's certainly personal. Perhaps some of the most personal interaction you may have with the state. In those circumstances, it seems wholly appropriate that a BSL signer should not have to rely on a spouse, a parent, a child, a sibling to enable that encounter to be accessible and inclusive. This seems a perfectly reasonable proposition and is certainly well set out and delivered for in other aspects of the public sector. To the bill itself, unopposed through all of its stages in the other place. Again, great testament to the Honourable Lady Rosie Cooper. And in many ways, for noble lords and those beyond this House, if you want to get to the entire purpose of the bill, just read the long title, so brilliantly penned by the Honourable Member Rosie Cooper. To the detail of the bill. Clause 1 recognises BSL as a language of England, Scotland and Wales. The bill does not extend to Northern Ireland for two key reasons. Firstly, to recognise and respect the usage of British Sign Language and Ireland Sign Language in Northern Ireland. And secondly, to note the limited extent of the Equalities Act 2010 in Northern Ireland. Clause 1 puts on a statutory footing what was set out in a ministerial statement in 2003 in terms of the recognition of BSL as a language. Clause 1.2 is a technical but important part of the bill, which simply sets out to ensure that this bill does not cut across or stymie any existing legislation and legislative provisions, not least those set out in the Equalities Act 2010, particularly pertaining to reasonable adjustments. Clause 2 puts a duty to report on the Secretary of State for the promotion and facilitation of BSL across all of the departments of state listed in the schedule to the bill. This could be plans, strategies, approaches in terms of promotion, press releases, anything in reality which leads to that promotion and facilitation of BSL. And it's clause 2 in many ways which would enable the deaf community to hold the Secretary of State and the government to account on the provisions of this private member's bill. Clause 3 sets out a duty on the Secretary of State in terms of the production of guidance for the promotion and facilitation of BSL. Again, there's a real opportunity here to bring out best practice, to set out case studies, in short, to drive up and improve right across the piece in terms of BSL. One of the key elements of Clause 3 is that it will be supported by an advisory board of BSL signers to put in their views, their experience, their expertise to the Secretary of State in the creation and deployment of that guidance. That brings me to the non-statutory provisions which the Minister has set out alongside the bill. I won't dwell too much on this because I wouldn't want to take words from my noble friend the Minister this morning, but that board of advisors, BSL signers, absolutely critical to so much of what will happen in this space. Secondly, a move to increase the number of signers across the country. Thirdly, to ensure that all elements of access to work fit within the intent and the purpose of this bill. My Lords, a private member's bill, clear, concise, simple and straightforward. In the British Sign Language Private Member's Bill, the Honourable Lady Rosie Cooper has given us a barrel of a bill. A barrel of a bill from which can flow forth the finest brew of all, inclusion. My Lords, I beg to move.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. My Lords, Baroness Thomas of Winchester is taking part remotely, and I invite Baroness Thomas of Winchester to speak. For the middle section of her speech, Lady Thomas will be assisted by Lord Bruce of Bernahy.
My Lords, I warmly welcome this bill and pay tribute to all those people who have made this possible, particularly to my old friend David Buxton, Chair of the British Deaf Association, and of course the noble Lord Hunt of Richmond. Some years ago, I met a man who happened to be in charge of the Access to Work programme at the GWP, and I managed to persuade him to fund BSL interpreters for the surgeries of counsellors with hearing loss, one of which was David Buxton. I don't know whether you know any counsellors who fell into this strategy. Perhaps the noble Lord the Minister can tell us on whether the scheme is ongoing. I now hand over to Lord Goods, to whom I'm very grateful for his help.
Baroness Thomas's speech. At first glance, this is a very modest bill, but it is a bill of enormous significance, as it gives legal status, as we've heard, to British Sign Language at long last. In time, it will be unacceptable for the only public service to offer BSL of the courts. It is also timely because for the last 2 years, people with hearing impairment have not been able to lip read with so many people in masks. I can imagine that this will have taken its toll on their mental well-being, with many very hesitant about going out and about. It must be stressed that BSL is not everyday English put into sign language, but is a language in its own right, with its own grammar and syntax. It is of fundamental importance that there are far more properly trained interpreters who can fulfil the promise this bill affords. And it is particularly important for there to be enough interpreters to work in the health service so that the children of parents with hearing loss are not put into the invidious position of having to be the go-between at consultations, especially when sensitive matters are being discussed. I know the Department for Education is considering a GCSE in BSL. Could the noble Baroness the Minister say how far advanced those plans are? I now hand back to Baroness Thomas to finish her speech.
My final point is to ask the noble Baroness the Minister how we should scrutinise this legislation in the months ahead. Will the guidance the GWP are going to issue to all departments be made public? And will the Cabinet Officer's report on the promotion of BSL be published? Finally, how will job seekers with hearing impairments be able to access the service of BSL interpreters? My lords, this bill is very welcome, if long overdue. We all wish it well.
My Lords, I very much welcome the second reading debate of this British Sign Language Bill. I have to admit it was quite an emotional moment when the Lord Speaker announced that it was being live-streamed on the Parliament channel. This is truly a landmark moment. I'd like to thank the many deaf people who have been in touch with me about this bill. Philip Lineker from Hearing Advisory Service wrote to me and said he couldn't imagine a more significant piece of legislation for deaf people. Indeed, it's a step forward, but there's always more that could be done. What we've seen in recent months is the power of television. The power of Strictly to educate is possibly more than we ever thought it might be. Rose Aileen Ellis was amazing. And it's wonderful to hear about the increase in people wanting to learn sign language. Over the years, I've heard many times about teaching BSL in schools or even having a GCSE. That would show true commitment. But I'd also like to thank Jill Jones from the Deaf Ex-Mainstreamers organisation. She told me that only 4,000 of the 54,000 deaf children in the UK are permitted to learn BSL. This is because deaf children must have an education, health and care plan in order to learn it. Which spoken language, my lords, requires a medical plan in order for a child to learn it. In published research on language endangerment, she states that there can be no other route to increasing the number of deaf children accessing BSL except by legal requirement. And she's concerned that while professionals working with families are supposed to give balanced information to all deaf and hard of hearing children, because of normalisation, they don't always do that. And sadly, my lords, I tried numerous times in lockdown to persuade the government and others to enable BSL interpretation to be available at the 5 p.m. briefings. And I know that this is beyond the scope of the bill. But with the commitment that we're seeing in the chamber today, I hope that that might be something that could change in the future. It was possible in Scotland, but not the rest of the UK. Linguists have recognised sign languages being bona fide languages from the 1970s. And it'd be interesting how we could move on from here and look at how we can protect BSL in terms of giving it the same status as English, Welsh and Gaelic. The same ethos was applied successfully in the Welsh Language Act 1993 in terms of giving this recognition. I would like to thank the Noble Lord, Lord Holmes, for explaining the issues with the Northern Ireland, of which I've had quite a number of people asking me that question. My Lords, as wonderful as Strictly was, the memories may quickly fade, and I don't want to lose the momentum that we have. So it is important that we do everything we can to promote and facilitate training and education for families with deaf and hard of hearing children about British Sign Language. Also for co-workers and classmates, they need to be educated in high-quality sign language communication in order to better provide for the inclusion within the community of deaf and hard of hearing persons. Again, this is crucial to BSL maintenance. My Lords, I'd like very briefly to talk about the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. The Deaf Ex-Mainstreamers organisation were involved in the response to the UK Government in 2017. The UN CRPD clearly stated that families of deaf and hard of hearing children must be given information about BSL. This will not only help the BSL from its endangerment status, but actually just move the debate on. The UN Convention was ratified by the UK Government, so extremely helpful if this were more fully acknowledged. I hope that Her Majesty's Government will also continue to take advice from those who are experts in BSL maintenance, as well as talking to hard of hearing children who are rarely included in any discourse about BSL. My Lords, I'm hugely supportive of this bill, and I look forward to its progression very quickly and swiftly through your Lordship's chamber.
My Lords, I'm pleased to follow the Noble Baroness Gray Thompson and thank her for her very well-directed comments, which I'm sure will be well received. And I'm delighted to support this bill and to congratulate Rosie Cooper for introducing it and securing its passage through the other place. Rosie Cooper, as the daughter of deaf parents, knows all about the challenges of deafness and the importance and richness of sign language. And as the parent of deaf daughter myself, I've also learned so much about the deaf community in the UK and worldwide. I have limited use of sign language myself. I can fingerspell, but I greatly appreciate the skill of BSL interpreters and have campaigned to increase their number and status. I hope this bill will encourage more. I've campaigned in many ways on behalf of deaf people with varying degrees of success. I'm an honorary Vice President of the National Deaf Children's Society and of the RNID, of which I'm a former trustee, and I'm also a Special Representative of Deaf Kids International. Over the years, I've supported all efforts to give legal recognition to sign languages. As a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I was rapporteur on sign languages, and I tried to include sign language in the European Charter for regional or minority languages. And as Baroness Thomas has pointed out, the only place where BSL is required to be used by law is in our courts, and that is specifically because of the requirements of the European Convention of Human Rights. Even so, that has not always gone smoothly. Cases have been dropped because no sign language interpreter is available. I hope this bill will lead to an increase in the number of qualified interpreters generally. And it's ironic, my Lords, that languages such as Welsh, Gaelic and even Cornish have recognition in the United Kingdom, but BSL, an indigenous language, does not. Indeed, Welsh and Gaelic have their own TV channels, yet there are few people for whom these are their only language. Yet for some profoundly deaf people, BSL is their essential first language. I've been disappointed that on occasions ministers have sought to deprioritise sign language, quoting limited numbers. I believe the numbers are irrelevant. For our deaf fellow citizens, BSL is their passport to work, relationships and participation in the wider community. They have a right for that to be recognised. After years of campaigning, I realised there was a need for an all-party group on deafness, and thank all those who helped establish it and have kept it going. There are so many discrete issues affecting deaf people, ranging from access to audiology, digital hearing aids, subtitling, telephone communications, interpreters, etc. And we were honoured to have Jack Ashley as our president, and he gave us unstinting support. As rapporteur for the Council of Europe, I visited Sweden and Finland and produced a report in 2003 on the protection of sign language, which secured the support of the Assembly, but was not followed through by ministers, although a number of member states did subsequently provide official recognition of sign languages, as the Scandinavian countries did long ago, even enshrining it in their constitutions. And what I learnt in that process was that legal recognition has a transformational effect. It greatly increased deaf awareness and understanding of communications with deaf people. it led to the inclusion of sign languages in the curriculum, and this in turn had two important benefits. The first was a wider awareness of sign language across the population in general, and secondly, it increased the pool and deployment of sign language interpreters. I secured the support of Gordon Brown as Prime Minister for pilots, known as iSign, in Merseyside and Devon, to train more interpreters. These proved successful, and David Cameron undertook to extend them. So when I came up in the private members' bill ballot, I introduced my own bill into 2013. The Communication Support Deafness Bill addressed the needs for support for all forms of communication with deaf people, including lip-speaking, text-to-speech, recognition and sign language. And it also proposed a BSL board to promote sign language. Ironically, the Minister at the time, Mike Penning MP, declined to support the bill, and it was squeezed out. However, I'd like to think my engagement with him might have had some effect, because he is a sponsor of this bill. Somebody else who certainly had a galvanising effect, as Baroness Gray-Thompson has said, on securing government backing must surely be the inspirational Rose Ayling-Ellis, whose spectacular set in winning Strictly Come Dancing reached millions in showing that how BSL cements the bridge between the deaf and the hearing world. And the bill follows similar legislation in the Scottish Parliament and the progress of sign language in Wales, which understands bilingualism better than any part of the UK. While progress has been welcome, there is nevertheless much more to be achieved in all parts of the UK, and I hope the bill will be the start of a transformation. I completely understand and endorse the deaf community's wish to see this bill pass unamended into law, but I do have some questions for the Minister. The simplest and most welcome clause in the bill is clause 1.1, which simply states, British Sign Language is recognised as a language of England, Wales and Scotland. Hallelujah! However, can the Minister explain what the next clause means? Subsection 1 does not affect the operation of any enactment of rule of law. Does the Government envisage offering BSL as a language option within the school's curriculum? And I know that the RNAD have been working on this. This has proved popular and had enormous benefits in countries where this is the case. And will the Government reconsider giving support to the further development of video relay services, which help sign language users communicate remotely, not just for work and business purposes, but also for family and relationships? And although not directly related to only BSL, when can the Government achieve its commitment to ensuring that captioning, by subtitling, signing and audio description of streaming services, is brought fully into force? It is now nearly 5 years since the Digital Economy Act, which gives the Government the power to regulate these services, was passed. It's over a year since Ofcom gave the Government final recommendations on how this should work. So when will the secondary legislation be brought forward? And I appreciate it may not be the Minister's direct responsibility, but I hope she will be able to reply either now or in writing. The bill, as has been mentioned, excludes Northern Ireland, where British and Irish Sign Language are both used. Is the Minister aware of any proposals to introduce similar legislation for the province? And finally, in clause 3 of the bill, the Secretary of State is required to issue guidance about the promotion and facilitation of the use of British Sign Language. Will ministers engage with the private sector to encourage wider support for BSL through VRS and face-to-face interpretation? And like Baroness Thomas, I would like to commend my friend David Buxton for his tireless, cheerful and good-natured campaigning on behalf of his community. Thousands of deaf people are cheering this bill on. Let it be the start of a revolution in deaf awareness in the UK.
My Lords, it is a pleasure to follow the noble Lord Bruce, whose closing comments were undoubtedly uplifting for us all. And I do feel very humbled to be taking part in this debate on such a significant bill on such a historic day. As the noble Lord Speaker reminded us that this is the first occasion that British Sign Language will be used for our proceedings on Parliament TV. And I would like to start by congratulating the noble Lord Holmes for championing this bill in its passage through your Lordship's House, and to add to the many tributes that we've already rightly heard to my honourable friend Rosie Cooper MP, who brought this bill to the other place and has piloted it through. Her inspiring work has built such cross-party support such that this bill has every chance of becoming law. And I also want to congratulate all the many people who have campaigned over such a long time to bring this point to our attention, but also they have campaigned for the rights of those who deserve these rights. And this will be a tremendous opportunity for promoting opportunities for those who are disabled up and down our country. I have been very moved by some of the stories that I have heard from people advocating for this bill. Stories of gifted deaf people being denied opportunities because they are users of BSL. Tales of children having to interpret for their parents because no BSL signer was available, and as a result being party to sensitive discussions such as health diagnosis, frankly situations in which they should never ever have been involved. This should not be happening in our country in 2022. And who could not have been moved and uplifted by the gathering in Trafalgar Square just last Friday by campaigners, which took place on the same date that the UK government officially recognised BSL in 2003, and also was the day when MPs backed the proposed legislation at its report stage and third reading in another place. And the noble Lady Baroness Thomas made great and correctly fond and supportive reference to David Buxton, chair of the British Deaf Association and founder of the BSL Act Now campaign. And Mr Buxton said at this rally last week, and I quote, "It is not the end of the road, it is the start of the road," adding that the next campaign is to get BSL in the home and BSL in schools. And I endorse his comments. And I reflect that last Friday's rally had to be moved from Parliament Square to Trafalgar Square because of its popularity. And indeed, there was an appearance from Strictly Come Dancing winner Rose Ayling-Ellis. And she praised the turnout and told the crowd, "This is what the deaf community is all about." And those of us that remember her performance and her words on Strictly will know that she lifted our hearts and taught us so many lessons and inspired an audience, both those who are deaf, hard of hearing, but those who are not. And whilst indeed we may move on to the next episode of Strictly, I don't think we will be forgetting that inspiration in a very long while. As has been set out already, there are some 90,000 people in the UK for whom BSL is the primary method of communication, and 150,000 signers in total. But the fact is, deaf people do not still have access to the same public information and services that are so readily available to the hearing population, and that is the evidence, if ever we needed it, that we need to go further, starting with enshrining that recognition in legislation. This bill would constitute an important next step in upgrading BSL to the language of Great Britain that is well warranted. It would put it, as the noble Lady Baroness Gray-Thompson emphasised, on a similar footing to how Welsh and Gaelic are considered in Wales and Scotland respectively. And this bill would be, and this act would be, an important piece of symbolism, but it is so much more than just a gesture. This recognition will help to improve life for those who sign, particularly those who are deaf or deaf-blind and who rely on its various forms on a day-to-day basis. And legal recognition of BSL, as the noble Lord Bruce stated, means so much in practice because it will help to promote and facilitate its use, whilst the other measures in the bill will require the Secretary of State to report on how this is being done by the government and to take on leadership on this matter by issuing guidance for the wider government's own use. As we have heard, by issuing guidance on the use of BSL and requiring the Secretary of State to report on actions taken by the government departments to promote and facilitate its use, the bill would result in BSL users seeing an absolute step change in their ability to access public services in their first language. So I very much welcome this bill on behalf of these benches, and I do have just a few questions for the noble lady, the Minister. The first one relates to Clause 2, which places a duty on the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to report on the promotion and facilitation of British Sign Language by ministerial departments. So could the noble lady, the Minister, tell the House if that reporting requirement will extend beyond central government departments to other parts of public service? So will it, for example, cover the delivery of health services, the court services, job centres, and will it cover executive agencies and other arm's length bodies? I do hope the noble lady, the Minister, will be able to say that it will. And on Clause 3, which places a duty on the Secretary of State to issue guidance on the general promotion and facilitation of British Sign Language, again, could the noble lady, the Minister, tell the House whether that guidance will cover the public sector as a whole in the way I have described in respect of Clause 2? And finally, for this bill to get through before the end of this parliamentary session, we will need to show restraint. So can the noble lady, the Minister, assure the House that if no amendments are tabled, that this bill will definitely be passed before prorogation? My Lords, I want to conclude by once again congratulating the noble Lord Holmes, the Honourable Lady, my honourable friend Rosie Cooper MP, and the many, many campaigners. And I want to pledge support from these benches to this bill. This would be a really important moment, not just for the deaf community, but for everybody, when this bill, I hope, reaches the statute books.
My Lords, it is indeed a special day for us, and I'm delighted that this bill has come before your Lordship's House. I'd like to join all noble Lords in thanking my noble friend Lord Holmes for bringing forward this important bill. I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for West Lancashire, who's worked tirelessly with my honourable friend the Minister for Disabled People to build such great cross-party support for this bill. The Government is committed to supporting all people with a disability, including deaf people, to lead fulfilled, independent lives. For deaf people, this must include the ability to communicate with others through BSL or other forms of deaf communication. As my honourable friend, the Minister for Disabled People, has said, BSL is a rich, vibrant language in its own right that helps to build a sense of community for many deaf BSL signers. This was made absolutely clear, as the noble Baroness Merrin has already said, to all those who attended last week's Sign Language Week rally, which had to be moved to Trafalgar Square, organised by the British Deaf Association. Deaf people from across the country came together to mark the 19th anniversary of the recognition of BSL as a sign language in its own right by the UK Government. But this year's rally was filled with a sense of great anticipation that this bill would place this recognition into law, and we must not let them down. Attendees eagerly watched the bill's third reading, and the messages from the other place was clear. They want us to pass this bill and for the Government to get on with delivering for BSL signers and the deaf community, and this is what we intend to do. As my noble friend Lord Holmes has set out, this bill recognises BSL as a language of England, Wales and Scotland, and places a duty on the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to issue guidance on the promotion and facilitation of BSL. It also requires the Secretary of State to report on information supplied by ministerial departments regarding their use of BSL. We are going further. Alongside the bill, my honourable friend, Minister for Disabled People, has announced a suite of non-statutory measures which will help promote and facilitate the use of BSL. These include establishing a non-statutory advisory board of British Sign Language signers to advise the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions on matters relating to BSL, examining how we might increase the number of BSL interpreters, and reviewing how we might work in DWP to ensure the Access to Work Fund better helps BSL signers, and consider how the government can further facilitate and promote BSL usage. We hope that alongside these measures we will see an increase in the use of BSL across society. Noble Lords have raised a number of questions which I seek to address. The Noble Baroness Thomas asked about BSL guidance. As I've said, Clause 3 places a duty on the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to issue guidance on the promotion and facilitation of BSL, which will be developed together with deaf BSL signers as part of the remit on the non-statutory board. Guidance may include advice on reporting requirements, but also on best practice for BSL communications, and could include case studies setting out the value of BSL provision. The intention is that the government will work with the Board of BSL signers, as I've already said, to explore the best approaches to ensure the guidance is targeted at everyday interactions for deaf BSL signers, and help service providers and public authorities adhere to requirements in the Equalities Act 2010, and in particular the duty to make reasonable adjustments and the public sector equality duty. My noble Baroness Thomas also raised the issue about the progress of BSL GCSE, as did Lord Bruce, and I can confirm that DFE is working closely with subject experts to develop draft subject content for a BSL GSE. The DFE is also working with Ofqual to ensure the subject content can be assessed appropriately, and the department is aiming to consult publicly on the draft subject content later in 2022. The Minister for Disabled People has written to the Minister for School Standards to better understand if there is any potential to expedite this process. Noble Baroness Lady Thomas asked about the interpretation for local councillors holding surgeries. Councils are required by the Equality Act to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate the needs of disabled councillors who would otherwise be placed in a position of disadvantage compared to non-disabled councillors. An important point that the Noble Baroness Thomas raised about will job seekers be able to access BSL. DWP helps deaf people access our services in a number of ways. Lord Bruce raised the point about the video relay service, which I'll give more detail later, but it is available for all DWP services through gov.uk, and for existing deaf customers who require BSL, Job Centre Plus work coaches are able to book face-to-face BSL interpreter to come to appointments to help people. If a deaf person attends a job centre to seek access to DWP service, they will be signposted to use the video relay service via gov.uk, and where necessary a future appointment can be arranged for a face-to-face appointment with a BSL interpreter. The Noble Baroness Gray Thompson asked me a question about the United Nations, about the disabled group. Yeah. Please, can I write to you about that? Okay, that's good. I would like to thank the Noble Baroness Gray Thompson for her help in arranging for somebody to teach me to use sign language to say, I beg to move. However, I failed on this occasion because I don't have to do it. So I'm saving it for another day. And can I just say that in full agreement with the Noble Baroness Merrin and others, we will never ever forget the performance of Rose Ayling-Ellis. It did lift our hearts, and it has had a profound effect, for which we're all grateful. I would pay tribute to the Noble Lord Bruce for his efforts to promote the issues of deaf people and all the various groups that he's been on. And I think I know you tabled some legislation before, but this has been a bit long in the tooth coming, but we've got there in the end, and that's why we must make sure this bill pass. Baroness Thomas of Winchester asked me about why not make BSL an official language. This doesn't go far enough. Other languages of the UK, include English, do not have official recognition, so it wouldn't be appropriate to make an exception for BSL. Welsh is an official language in Wales only, and the bill provides for statutory recognition of BSL as a language which gives the assurances sought by deaf charities and the BSL signers they represent. Now, the Noble Lord Bruce raised the important point about Clause 3 and about guidance for business and the private sector. Guidance intended for public sector will be useful for the private sector, as it will set out information about BSL form and functions and set out case studies which are relevant and can be of use to the private sector. Now, again, the Noble Lord, Lord Bruce, raised the point about a province being recognised. I didn't catch the province, and so if you'll allow me to read Hansard and write to you to confirm the answer, I'd be most grateful. I've already made reference to the video relay services that the Noble Lord Bruce mentioned. Progress has been made in this area. A number of service and telecommunication companies have introduced video relay service, which allows deaf people to communicate with non-British Sign Language signers via an interpreter using video phones.
I'm very grateful, and I do appreciate the development of VRS, but what a lot of deaf people are concerned about is that they want it for social purposes, and these services cost quite a lot of money. And I have been pressing for the government to look at ways of getting affordable access for deaf people to use it, not just for work, but for relationships and family and personal reasons. And I just hope that the Minister might take that away.
Well, will you allow me to take that back to my colleague, Minister for Disabled People, and I will write to you and place a copy in the library for the whole House. The Noble Lord Bruce raised the point about the bill affecting operations of enactment of rule of law. The rationale for Clause 1.2 is to ensure legal certainty so that recognition of BSL would not generate confusion or disputes. In particular, the purpose and effect of Clause 1 is to leave the existing balance of legal protections of the Equality Act 2010 unaffected. The Noble Baroness Merrin asked about how broad the guidance and reporting requirements will be. Clause 2 requires the Secretary of State of Work and Pensions to regularly report on what each relevant ministerial department, those detailed in the schedule of the bill, has done to promote and facilitate the use of BSL in its communications with the public. These communications could include public announcements, publication of a plan, strategy or consultation document, or activities promoting its work, for example, press conferences. The reporting requirements will be for UK ministerial departments to comply with, not for individual hospitals or schools. This reporting will give us a much better understanding of how BSL is being used across government and how we can continue to improve communication for BSL signers. I'd like to finish by saying two things. Firstly, can I also endorse the great work of David Buxton? He's been spoken of with great affection and great dignity, and I and my benches will join in that tribute. And let's just be absolutely clear. We want this bill to go through. It's very important. Expectations are high. Commitment is high. And as with the previous private member's bill I did, if there are any issues any noble lord has would you please come and see us? We'll meet you, so that when we get to committee stage there'll be no amendments and the bill will pass in time for great celebration by the people for whom this will make a great change to their life.
My Lords, can I thank all noble lords who participated in today's important and indeed ground-breaking debate. Each contribution has underscored not only the purpose of the bill, but the need for the bill, and in essence, that simple and most powerful of all points. When we seek to include a seemingly particular sector, group or community, when we do that, everyone benefits. Can I thank my noble friend the Minister and also her ministerial colleague, the Minister for Disabled People, Right Honourable Chloe Smith, in another place, for all of the work and commitment that you have both shown to the bill. To all the officials at DWP for all the work that they have put into briefings and indeed the preparation of the bill. And again, to the Honourable Lady in another place, Rosie Cooper, for all of her work on the bill. And finally, to David Buxton, who has done so much in this space for so many. My Lords, I beg to move.
The question is that this bill will be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion will say content. The contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move that this bill be now committed to a committee of the whole House.
The question is that this bill will be committed to a committee of the whole House. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary, not content. The contents have it.
A message from the Commons that they have passed.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.